All right, let's get this thing going. So, I don't know how long this will last because it seems that frames are dropping pretty badly because this happens when you live in the rural United States. So hopefully everybody in the chat can hear me. Hopefully things are working. If it gets really laggy and roboty, let me know in the chat. If it's tolerable, let me know in the chat. If it's not tolerable, I'll probably schedule it for later where I can get closer to my Wi-Fi modem for a better signal. Because I don't want to do low quality streams. That's just not, I'm not into low quality streams. But since my hotkeys seemingly don't work, give me a second here to pull the capture the window. I can figure out why it's not letting me. There we go. Since hotkeys don't seem to want to work on this laptop when I'm in OBS. Why is it not giving me the option? Go. Go. Alrighty. So, well, nobody in the chat has told me that it's not running terribly, so hopefully oh, I know what Man, it would be really awesome to have hotkeys that worked. Let's go ahead and do that. Find a nice good size here. So, this is Braxton Hunter's, I believe I am pronouncing that correctly. Braxton Hunter's 10 Questions for Atheists video. I watched like the first 2 minutes of it before deciding that I wanted to do a live stream response to it. And so I said I'm going to stop watching it so that I can have responses that are raw, genuine, and uncut. So I just think that that's, I don't know, I think that's a little better than having pre-programmed responses. So Tapioca says I'm running all right for him. So hopefully things are going better. Maybe it smoothed out a little bit since I actually went live. But I pulled a Bosch by going live 10 minutes before with just a blank screen up there because he's a really popular streamer, and so I do try to mimic some of the techniques that he uses, amongst others. But I think it's a good time to jump on into this. Let's get started. And hopefully the sound is okay.
Worldview discussions space can be so combative. And when atheists and Christians come up with lists of questions that they don't think the other side can answer, those questions usually aren't genuine. I've never made a list like that, although I've responded to some. Here, I hope my atheist interlocutors will consider these questions deeply without giving glib answers. These aren't meant to be gotcha questions, though I'm not asking for no reason. I expect you will have answers, and I want to hear what the most sincere among you have to say. With that, here are my 10 questions for atheists.
Poggers.
What facts about reality that you and I agree are real facts about the way the world is does your worldview account for, but my Christianity doesn't account for, or at least doesn't account for well? And for those of you that would point out atheism isn't a worldview, we're talking about you, your worldview that includes atheism. I can't think of any. Christianity accounts for evil, suffering, the existence of other religions, including supernatural events in those other religions, science, and differences among different denominations of Christianity. But I can think of many things that the most common worldviews that include atheism don't answer as well as I think Christianity does. Like universal supernatural claims, universal religious experiences, free will, morality, near-death experiences, beauty, the rapid expansion of the early church, the events surrounding the life and death of Jesus.
Okay, he's asked the question. I'm just going to go ahead and answer. I wanted to see how much of it he was going to add. So the question, and I'm going to simplify it a little bit more, is what facts about reality do atheists and Christians agree upon that atheists believe their atheism or their worldview that incorporates atheism can explain better, or can either explain that Christianity can't, or that can explain better than Christianity. I would state that while his worldview can provide some explanation for the things that he listed, like suffering and evil and beauty and all these other things that Christians bring up, I don't think that their explanation comports with what we know to be the case for reality. So the worldview that I have that would comport with atheism, or that would rather include atheism, would be naturalism. And I would state that naturalism can explain all of these facts of reality better. A distinction that I want to make is that asking for explanations for things like, well, why can we understand reality in a rational way? Why is there a reality in existence at all? Why are the laws of physics the way that they are questions that I don't think anybody can answer, mainly because I think they're the wrong questions to ask. I think that questions like that sort of, how do I want to word this? They put more into reality than what's actually there. I would say that reality just is what it is, and it does what it does, and being that humans reside within that reality, and we have the capability of receiving external sensory stimuli about that reality, that we can thereby develop abstract methodologies for conceptualizing, rationalizing, and communicating what we observe in a way that we can all agree upon, and in a way that allows us to come to understand what our reality is. I would argue that for specific things like, say, maybe evil, our worldview explains that as just, well, human nature. Humans are going to act in particular ways based on how they were raised and numerous other biological and social factors. I don't think one needs a Christian worldview to explain those, but at the same time, there are facts that I think both atheists and Christians can agree upon that they can both explain, and that, at least necessarily speaking, one isn't really better than the other. It just comes down to which you think works best for how you view the world. So hopefully that was a decent answer to that question.
Jesus of Nazareth and our shared longing for purpose and meaning. So, what is it that Christianity doesn't answer as well as your worldview?
What is it that Christianity doesn't answer as well as my worldview? I would state that, and this is going to be a little weird, because I would state that things like pretty much everything that has been explained naturally is better explained under a naturalist worldview. Yes, Christians can explain that, but they don't explain it exclusively within a Christian framework. In fact, these things are explained without any reference to anything supernatural whatsoever. So I would argue that those things fit more neatly into, say, a naturalist worldview, where we don't have to assume or presume anything extra in order to make sense of these things.
If your definition of atheism is merely that it's a lack of belief in God and you're just waiting to be convinced, but then you speak of him as though he's in some way synonymous with Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, or fairies, doesn't that at least send the message to your listeners that you actually believe that there is no God? After all,
I did want to answer, because I am not a lack theist, as they're often worded, where it's not that I say that God doesn't exist, I just haven't been convinced he exists. And I am an atheist in the positive sense. There is no God. But this is what's been dubbed Hunter's dilemma, I believe. And it's essentially kind of like how he worded it, that how can you state that you merely lack a belief in God? You're not outright denying his existence. You just lack belief that he does. But then at the same time, consistently, what's the word I'm looking for, hint at this idea that God is an imaginary being. How do you reconcile not claiming that you don't make the claim that he's imaginary, while at the same time making statements that essentially insinuate that God is imaginary? So I probably won't provide much of an answer for this question, simply because I don't believe it's posed to an atheist like me. But I do have to say, I do think the Hunter's dilemma is actually somewhat legitimate, because I have heard a lot of atheists out there that say, well, I'm not saying that God doesn't exist, it's just that I'm not convinced, but then say, oh, well, gods are bullshit, gods are imaginary, it's no different than Santa Claus. So I think he's kind of got a point here, I really do.
Well, these are entities and beings that you likely believe do not exist. And if your response is that you merely lack a belief in Santa Claus and don't actively believe that he does not exist, doesn't that sound a little disingenuous, honestly? When atheism becomes a part of someone's worldview, they typically change their positions on other issues like abortion, sexual morality, and a number of other things. I actually have several videos of well known atheists saying that there's nothing wrong with prostitution,
Sippy
that
sip
they
here.
hope their children don't save themselves until marriage, and that sex workers should be put up on a pedestal no different than the military. I didn't use those.
I want to pause right there. I wouldn't say, and obviously this is generally speaking because I can't know what every more secular thinking individual would say, but I don't think it's about putting sex workers up on a pedestal per se. I think it's more just acknowledging that, well, number one, people like sex, and number two, people are gonna buy it, and that why can't we just treat it as another commodity like humans have for, quite frankly, the majority of human history, and that if we do so, we should legalize it and regulate it, ensure that it is a safely running industry for both the people selling the product and for those receiving it, which, in my opinion, I think would be better than keeping it illegal and pushing people into the black market like we see with, the traditional pimps and hoes that you see in all the gangbanger movies. I just don't agree with that. I think that because it's a black market, these women are often abused. They make no money. They're not protected. It's a bad deal. And anybody that's grown up around that stuff and has seen that stuff, like I have, probably would agree with me at least to some extent. I think that legalizing it, regulating it, unionizing it, and protecting it would be better for both those, like I said, selling the product and those receiving it.
Here because I didn't want to seem combative to individuals, specifically the individuals who made those statements. But even if you didn't become an atheist just so you could sin, and I believe you, do you at least understand why those moves could send that message to people who might say that to you?
Yeah, I can. But I think the issue is more so here with people changing a lot of their social views when they transition from being religious, oftentimes deeply religious, to being atheist, is that religion, especially here in the United States with Christianity, is generally much more fundamental with much more traditionalist social views, like that men should be the one that work while women should be the ones staying at home cooking and cleaning and raising kids, that the man should be the figure of the sort of the head of the household, that it should be a man and a woman raising children. And I think that when people lose their religion, especially if it's a fundamentalist religion, and I apologize if you can hear the dog barking, he's really loud. Um, when people lose their religion, especially if it was a fundamentalist religion, their social views open up and they begin to lose these traditionalist views on society and say, you know what, hey, I think that there really isn't anything wrong with two men raising a children. I don't think there's anything wrong with a man staying home and raising the kids and cooking and cleaning while the woman goes out and works, or both parents working. They, I think that it pulls them out of viewing society in a traditionalist manner because the sort of the foundation for those views, which would be the religion, has been lost.
If it's a lack of belief sort of atheism, what is it? Is it 50-50, 60-40, 75-25? And at what point do you feel disingenuous saying that you merely lack a belief as opposed to leaning towards, I believe that God does not exist?
So for me, like I said, I'm not a lack theist, but that is a question I have also asked a lot of lack theists, is that what when would you consider yourself to be convinced? Like, what is the split? How sure are you about a God existing? Are you just not sure at all? Like, I just don't believe that one does, but I don't believe that one doesn't. And I don't care what people want to say. That's agnosticism. That's always been agnosticism. That is what the philosophers consider agnosticism to be, which is one of the reasons why I don't like the lack theist definition of atheism, because what it does is it essentially takes everybody who's not a theist and makes them an atheist, which makes it hard to distinguish between all the different types of non-theism: agnosticism, agnosticism, igtheism, theological non-cognitivism, apatheism, atheism. They're not all actually atheists. There are distinctions here, and that is why, while I'm not going to say the lacktheist definition is wrong, because words are polysemous, it trivializes the word atheism to the point that it's no longer distinguishable from all of the different subsects, I guess you could say, of non-theism, which is an overarching view. I would prefer the lacktheist definition of atheist. I would prefer if those people just said non-theist rather than equivocating atheism with non-theism, because practically no philosophers would agree that those words mean the same thing.
Now, I know we've all got our talking points, but I want you to struggle to be as sincere with yourself as you can right now. Doesn't it bother you a little bit that when we come to talk about the origins of the universe, and if there's a multiverse, the origin of that too, that the only real options you've got besides God is a past infinite universe, which is impossible, or the universe coming to exist uncaused out of nothing?
So that is a false dilemma fallacy, also otherwise known as false dichotomy, where one limits options to generally two when there are much more. So an infinite regress is not actually impossible. The math does not say it's impossible, and the physics does not say it's impossible. A physical object being that is extant in space-time, having quantities that are infinite, isn't possible, but objects extant in space-time being infinite in a quantity, one or more quantities, is different than space-time itself, which is not an object extant in anything being infinite. And Sean Carroll has made that distinction. I believe Lawrence Krauss, who I did lose some respect for, but he's still a relevant professional here, has made that distinction. Other people, I want to say Alexander Vilenkin, but I might be wrong on that, have also made that distinction where the thought experiments like Hilbert's Hotel show the not really the inconsistencies, but the paradoxicalities of an object already extant in space-time having one or more quantities that is infinite being problematic, being paradoxical, versus space-time itself being extended infinitely into the past. I don't think that it is. Most cosmologists would firstly say we don't know, because we haven't gone back that far to know how the physics of our reality works then, but the math nor the physics, neither the math nor the physics, states that a universe that can be extended infinitely into the past can't happen. Nowhere in math or physics is that stated. It just isn't. And the reason for this is because time is tenseless. And the problem here is that, I feel like this is the question I'll probably end up spending the most amount of time on. The problem here is that most theists view time in the tensed sense, whereby the past used to exist, but no longer does. The present is really the only moment that ever exists. And the future doesn't yet exist, but will, and is pure potentiality. The problem with that is that the main contention this worldview makes is that right now, for us, is right now absolutely. It's the same right now everywhere. We've already shown that's false. One of the biggest reasons is, one of the best examples to demonstrate this is, well, first let me dive a little bit into the math. And I know a lot of people don't like math, but the thing with advanced concepts in physics like this is, and this is part of the reason I've become a science communicator on YouTube, is because the professionals, they don't want to scare people away talking about the math, but these concepts are difficult to understand in terms of what they really are saying if you don't show some of the math. There are two types of transformations that are in the set of the Lorentz transformations, which show how things can change when you transform a space that thing is defined in. And what they show is that when you make certain transformations, time can be extended and lengths can be contracted. These are called the transformations for length contraction and time dilation. We've actually seen this in reality. The clocks on our GPS satellites, because they are further outside of the gravitational well that the Earth creates, and gravity is curvature in the geometry of space-time. What this means is that time actually flows, don't take that literally, it flows a little bit faster than what it would closer to the Earth. So anything further away from the Earth, time moves faster, and again, don't take that literally, it moves faster for those objects. A clock resting on your head would technically tick faster than a clock sitting on your foot. So the clocks on our GPS satellites actually tick slightly faster than clocks on Earth would. Over the course of 24 hours, if these clocks weren't continuously readjusted, over the course of just 24 hours, GPS coordinates would be off by 7 miles. This is direct observational evidence that right now, for us here on Earth, is not the same right now for the guys on the International Space Station, or the GPS satellites, or the sun. So this shows that there is no absolute right now. There is no preferred temporal frame of reference. And thus, the A theory of time, or tensed time, can't be true. But the main thing about the beginning of our universe is, because time is tenseless, if there is an absolute earliest moment, that there is nothing, there just literally is nothing before it, that's not the moment that the universe's existence begins. It's not where the universe physically enters into a state of being and then begins to evolve from there. It would be a beginning in the same sense that the front door is the beginning of your house. Your house begins at the front door, but your house doesn't begin to exist at the front door. The whole house already exists, and it's bounded at one end. And that's what most cosmologists would say if we were to grant the premise that there's an absolute earliest moment in spacetime.
Or something far less clear than even those. It seems that for any worldview that includes atheism, there's a massive blind spot when it comes to the origin of the universe. And all the attempts to try and circumvent that problem seem desperate and at least far less likely than theism. My question isn't just what do you typically say about this, because I'm well aware of the responses. My question is simply this: when you step away from the debate mode that it's so easy for us all to get into online, doesn't this issue destabilize you a little bit? It seems to fit really poorly with any worldview that includes atheism.
I don't agree with that. I don't I don't think I don't understand why it would. There are problems with the concept of creatio ex nihilo, whereby God literally created something out of nothing. The main problem here is that theists will state that, well, God has to exist because the universe can't come from nothing, but it's entirely possible for God to create it out of nothing. So the principle ex nihilo nihil fit, out of nothing, nothing comes, is invoked to then argue that God had to be there to bring the universe out of nothing. But the very principle you used to invoke God would also apply to God. God can't create the universe out of nothing because out of nothing, nothing comes. So there's a huge, huge problem with the whole concept of God creating anything out of nothing. Creation is, by definition, an action. It's being in a state of action. You're acting on something to turn it into something else. This is the only form of creation that's ever been observed. There has never been an observation of the creation of something that is material from something that is not material. That's never once, ever been observed. How would you even do that? Because if creation is an action, and God is acting on literally nothing, then God isn't acting on anything. And if God isn't acting on anything at all, then God isn't in a state of action. And if God isn't in a state of action, then what is he creating? He's not in a state of creation. And this is why the universe has a beginning. There's much more. There's a lot more nuance there when cosmologists say that. The main thing that I want to say is that we don't know anything about our universe, at least experimentally, prior to 10 to the negative 13th seconds, because all physical descriptions of space-time break down. We don't have physics that can describe anything prior to that moment, at least experimentally. So nobody, atheist or theist, can make any claims about what occurs at these moments, because nobody knows. God would be just another, I wouldn't really call it a hypothesis because it can't really be tested for, and for the reasons I've already outlined, it doesn't seem to make sense from a philosophical or a metaphysical standpoint. But it would just be another assertion, no different than stating that it was fairies, or that it was Santa Claus.
Of the arguments for God's existence, is there one that to you seems more interesting than the rest? Is there one that for you actually does weigh in favor of theism? Which one?
That one's there are arguments I would state are at least prima facie better than others, like the Kalam cosmological argument. At face value, I mean, it is a. I want to make sure I don't get confused sound versus valid here. If I do, somebody in the chat correct me. But I believe an argument is sound if the conclusion logically follows from the premises, and that it is valid if both the conclusion follows from the premises and the premises are true. So the Kalam cosmological argument is sound. The conclusion, therefore the universe must have a cause, does follow logically from the two premises. Whatever begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist. The first premise, I would argue, isn't true, at least not in the sense that theists are talking about, where this is an efficient cause creating a material effect out of no material cause. The second one, I would state, isn't true because the universe doesn't begin to exist for the reasons that I've outlined. But I wouldn't say that there's any argument I would find convincing for those who have examined the philosophy, the physics, or the metaphysics that underlie the arguments.
Most atheists I've met humbly admit that they don't think they can have absolute certainty about much of anything. What they want from the Christian is a demonstration that God exists or that Christianity is true. But when we offer the reasons to believe that we do have, those are typically deemed not good enough. So, what sort of evidence, if any, would be enough to convince you? Do you know? And since it's often a conversation stopper, let's take experimental reproducibility off the table, since that.
But see, that's a problem, because if we take experimental reproducibility off the table, anything becomes a viable answer. Where you put God into the equation, I could put fairies, or dragons, or leprechauns, or the great Gloomenschleimer. I could slap any label on it, call it whatever I want, and you can't prove me wrong, so it must be true. The evidence that would convince me of either a God, any God existing, or B, any one particular actual religion being true, would be a body of objectively verifiable data that concords exclusively with or positively indicates the existence of that God or the truth of that religion over any of the others. And I don't think it's ever been demonstrated. The reason why people want experimental reproducibility is because you can't establish accuracy without it. That's why we know the things that we know, because it's been experimentally reproduced. And like I said earlier, if we take experimental reproducibility off the table, then where you posit God is causing all of these miracles, God brought Jesus back from the dead, I could just as easily argue that no, it wasn't. It was the great Gloobenschleimer, or it was fairies, or it was Santa Claus. And it's no more or less valid than the claim that you have made. So removing experimental reproducibility just creates a whole host of problems, not just for you, but for me, for all of us. Any claim we make, since it can't be experimentally tested to see whether there's any validity to it, can't be known to be true or false. Falsifiability is the hallmark of figuring out whether something is true. And anything that is unfalsifiable, by definition, we can't know if it's true. You can't say that Christianity is true or that God exists with any reasonable level of confidence if we can't actually show that to be the case. And anything that is true can be experimentally verified. So if something cannot ever be experimentally verified, to me, that sort of forms major problems for arguing that thereby the thing is true. And notice, I'm not saying that we need to experimentally reproduce it in just within the framework of science. any methodology that can serve as a form of objective verification would be accepted. Any methodology. Let's find the methodology that would best apply here and apply it. And if we can't, then it remains unfalsifiable, and until it has been demonstrated to be at least reasonably true, there's no reason to accept that it could be.
That's not even all.
I want to quote Aaron Ra here because I think it's very succinct, it's very simple, and it makes the point. If you can't show it, you don't know it.
Always necessary for science. To what extent did social and moral issues start you down the path toward your atheism? That is to say, the typical Christian or religious views on sexuality, gender, rights, and acts and commands of God in the Old Testament. It seems that many deconversion stories online begin with, or at least include, LGBT issues, purity culture, or hell as instrumental in the deconversion process. It strikes me that what should matter most is the truth and not what we might prefer that the truth were. I honestly wonder how much those issues and ones like them motivate the deconversion rather than all this talk about evidence.
For me personally, and obviously I can only speak for myself here, for me personally, I don't think the social issues had much to do with it. Because even when I was a practicing Catholic, I still didn't think that there was anything wrong with being gay or transgendered. I still didn't adhere to any of the traditionalist social values that many religious people do. So at least for me, though the shift in social values never really happened and wasn't really a factor in my deconversion, as it's often put. But I would state that observing how, I would argue, quite frankly, bigoted a lot of, and I'm not speaking about particularly, I believe it's Braxton Hunter, not Hunter Braxton. I'm not speaking particularly about Braxton here, but I do find that a lot of, at least here in the United States, the fundamentalist evangelicals have a lot of bigotry. They want to dictate how other people can live their lives and use the state to do that, while at the same time railing against the big government controlling their lives. I find it hypocritical. So I would state that noticing the difference between the social sort of liberalism of non-religious people versus religious people has reaffirmed my atheism or made me feel more confident in it, but it didn't make me an atheist.
Can you name the last 3 academic books you read by theists on the subject? How long ago did you read them? Or is most of your understanding of apologetics and atheism from non-scholarly internet? And be honest with yourself about this. Anyone can Google up a list of books and paste them in the comments section. But I want to know, are you getting the best from the other side?
Have I read any scholarly books on this? I don't know, I haven't. It would depend on whether or not one considers like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, both of which are peer-reviewed philosophical journals, to be scholarly. I would consider them to be scholarly, but I don't know if they would fit into what Braxton is asking here. So, but I mean, I have, when I from 2012 to 2015, so about 3.5, 4 years, I followed people like William Lane Craig, John Lennox, Alvin Plantinga, quite closely, actually. And I didn't really read any of their books, but I watched a lot of their lectures, a lot of their videos. I did a lot of reading, like I said, on the SEP and the IEP. So, I mean, I guess the only thing I can say to that is take it for what it's worth, but I don't claim to be an expert in apologetics. As somebody who was once engaged in it, this is going to sound somewhat pompous, but it's an observation that I've made. I have found that myself and others like me who were atheists that were once active, that weren't just religious, but actively engaged in religious apologetics when they were religious, tend to have a better understanding of apologetic arguments and tend to find more places of agreement with theists than your typical run-of-the-mill atheist. But I did want to clarify, I guess you would have to take it for what it's worth, honestly, whether you think that, having read the things that I've read in the SCP, the IEP, having followed closely some of the world's foremost apologists, really counts for anything. I would say that it does, but again, to reiterate, I don't consider myself a professional apologist.
Let's finish with a pretty common one.
Professional in apologetics is what I meant to say. I'm not an apologist at all.
If you found out today, to your satisfaction, that Christianity were true, would you accept God's authority, repent of your sins, and trust Jesus as your king?
If in the hypothetical that Christianity was demonstrated to be true, essentially, would I come to Christianity? Yeah, probably. I would have to ask the level of which it's true. Like, is the gay people are sinners and going to hell part true? Is the transgenders are terrible people and they're also going to hell part true? Is it that everybody who's not a Christian is also going to hell part true? Is the whole idea of hell part true? So for me, and that's why for me it's hard to answer this question, not because I don't want to answer it, but to what degree is Christianity true? Because let's be honest here, there's numerous denominations. Did the Catholics get it right? Did the Mormons get it right? Did the Jehovah's Witnesses get it right? And this is one of the issues with saying, well, what if Christianity was shown to be true? Well, okay, I'm willing to grant the hypothetical, but to what degree do you mean when you say Christianity being true? Because obviously, not all Christians can even agree on what Christianity is. Most evangelicals, at least in the United States, don't even think Catholics or Mormons are Christian, even though no mainstream scholarship outright rejects those what I would consider ridiculous, absurd claims. So, I mean, yes, if it was shown to be true, I'd say, okay, yeah, I'm a Christian now, but what version or form of Christianity is the one that's true? And this is why I think it would be hard for anybody to demonstrate that it is. Because everybody wants their version of Christianity to be true. So I don't... Like I said, that question, there's just a lot of nuance in it to really just answer it forthright without making a reference to the nuance that's there. Well, I actually got through that video a lot quicker than I thought I was going to. I've been going for about 50 minutes, but yeah, hopefully, I don't know if Braxton. Yes, I keep wanting to say Hunter Braxton, but I'm almost positive it's Braxton Hunter is his name. He saw my post on Twitter. I don't know if he did tune into this live, if he's planning on watching it, but hopefully he felt that I provided an honest answer to these questions. I felt that I provided an honest answer to these questions. I'm going to go back to full screen here really quickly. So I do hope that he sees this video, and if he does see this video, I'd like him to comment and just let me know, more so not necessarily disagreeing with any of the answers, because that would be just a whole discussion, which I would not mind having with him. I actually think Braxton's a pretty decent guy, one of the better apologists out there. But if he does ever see this video, I'd encourage him to comment and just let me know what you think. Did you think my answers were honest? Were they satisfactory? Because like I said, I had only watched, I think I had gotten to like maybe a third of the way through the second question, and I said to myself, you know what? I want to do a live response to this, and I want my questions to actually be more genuine, where, when you ask somebody a question right there on the spot, where they don't have time to think about an answer and provide some long and convoluted answer to something. Not that that's wrong. I don't think that's wrong, but with something like this, I think it's just a little bit more genuine to answer the questions right when you hear them. And you would put you on your toes, seeing how well you can answer these types of questions that I personally wouldn't say are like hard or difficult, but that I think he did ask honest questions that he was curious about, and I think that they're not like the easiest questions ever. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream. If you haven't already, do consider hitting that subscribe button. I'd really like to grow the Lion's Den. 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year. That's not gonna happen. I'm just fucking with you guys. Also, follow me on Twitter if you're about on the interwebs, at Leophilius, spelled the same as my my YouTube channel is. And with that, I'm gonna let you guys go. Bye bye, everybody.